I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. The historic second impeachment trial of Donald Trump is underway. The Democrats' case focuses on Trump's tweets and statements pushing the big lie that the election was stolen, culminating in his fiery speech at the January 6th rally. That speech provoked the ugly and deadly assault on the Capitol. Rioters stormed the building, tried to stop Congress from certifying the Electoral College results. The Times writes that the strategy of Democrats is to present, quote, a fast-paced cinematic case aimed at rekindling the outrage lawmakers experienced on January 6th. An ABC Ipsos poll finds 56% favor convicting Trump and barring him from ever holding office. 43% want him acquitted. But there's almost no chance the Senate will convict. So what's the political upside for Democrats in going ahead with the trial? Meanwhile, President Biden is making a fast and furious push for his agenda, which includes a COVID relief package, addressing climate change, and immigration. Biden's job approval numbers are solid. A Reuters Ipsos poll has 57% approving the job he's doing, 34% disapproving. That's better than Trump ever had. But will the impeachment trial derail or delay the Biden agenda? Will it blow up his push for bipartisanship? We're joined by Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Trip Gabriel, national correspondent for the Times. Peter, explain to me, this impeachment trial is now going on. Ted Cruz and others say there's no chance of conviction. They haven't heard the evidence yet. Does that mean they simply believe that the trial is unconstitutional, that you cannot convict a former president, that they don't even care to hear the evidence of whether he's guilty of insurrection or not? Is there no way at all of persuading them, convincing him that he might be guilty of that?
Well, look, I do think that a number of Republicans do find it troubling on the merits to have a trial of a former president. And by the way, Democrats felt that way back after Bill Clinton left office, and there was a brief talk about putting him on trial even after he left office. So I think where you stand depends on where you sit, of course. There's also the enduring influence of President Trump within the Republican Party. There had been this feeling after January 6th that perhaps that had been the shock to the system that forced Republican office holders like Mitch McConnell to finally say, we're done with him. And yet in the weeks since then, the former president seems to have shown that he still has the support of a lot of the Republican base. And because of that, a lot of Republican office holders are reluctant to abandon him, even now, given this situation. That doesn't mean that they couldn't switch. Obviously, Bill Cassidy was one who did switch on the point of whether or not this trial is constitutional. Some of these Republican senators have said that even though they don't think that they should be proceeding with a trial of a former president, that they're still now going to listen to the evidence and be open to a possible vote for conviction. But I don't think too many people think that the managers would be able to convince 11 Republicans to say, yeah, we think he's guilty in a process that we think is unconstitutional.
Trip, what is the feeling out in the country? You've been talking to Republicans in various states, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, elsewhere. What about Republican office holders and the Republican rank and file as well?
Sam, it's still Donald Trump's party in most of the important, battleground states, and is, for better or ill. You can see it in a state like Virginia, which used to be a toss-up state and now is almost, an entirely blue state. Last week, the legislature there became the first state in the South to outlaw the death penalty. The former capital of the Confederacy. You never would have seen that, perhaps before Donald Trump. But in states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, states we think of as battlegrounds, Republicans are in control of the legislatures in all those states, and they're doubling down on what's happening in Washington. Trump's on trial for a big lie about a stolen election that led to a siege in the Capitol, and in many state capitals, Republicans are using the same big lie to introduce a further round of laws to restrict voting access, to roll back some of the no excuse absentee mail voting laws that were seized upon by Democrats in the last election.
Peter, you wrote in the Times, and this was so striking, that the impeachment trial is a visceral reckoning over Trump's very presidency, as you put it. His assaults on the truth, his attempts to foment divisions, his undermining of a democratic election, and of course, the very irony that this is a made-for-TV event, which is how Trump arguably got there in the first place. How is this likely to develop over the next days, and if it does, weeks? Do we have any sense, and we're talking before the weekend, of course, what the procedure is likely to be? Are they going to call witnesses? Is there a possibility that the president will take the bait, if there is any, and want to testify himself? What's going to happen?
Well, for one thing, the president has been remarkably and uncharacteristically quiet through all of this, at least as of the beginning of the trial. He's been told by advisors and family members that he has the votes for acquittal in the bag, and the only thing he could do by speaking out would be to endanger that, right? He already had 44 votes on that test vote on the constitutionality. That's 10 more than he needs for acquittal. He needs 34 votes to block a 2/3 vote required by the Constitution for conviction. So speaking out would only endanger that and perhaps alienate Republicans who are not particularly his biggest fans, even if they are sticking with him on the votes right now. So strangely enough, you hear silence from Mar-a-Lago. That doesn't mean he's not paying attention behind the scenes. He is. He's obviously critiquing his lawyers' performances, and he's stewing about the presentations and the accusation that he is responsible for the violence because he gave that speech on January 6th and he propagated these false fraud allegations. But for now, it's basically an unusually quiet Donald Trump. Now, where does this go? Look, the Democrats have the opportunity to call witnesses, which they were not allowed to do in the last trial, and yet they don't look like they're going to avail themselves of it this time. Ironically, for all of the fighting that they made last time, Democrats did, about how there's no such thing as a trial without witnesses, they're likely to have a trial without witnesses. Now, their argument would be, we don't need one. We don't need witnesses this time because we got the videotape. And the evidence is right there in front of us. We all know what happened and we can see it for our own eyes. So we don't necessarily need to have witnesses. The other part, of course, the behind the scenes reasoning is that they don't want to continue a process that looks like it is likely to go toward acquittal. They don't want to prolong it so much that it goes, that it doesn't help them at all, and it only ends up distracting from President Biden's efforts to move along his agenda, particularly on COVID relief.
Let me ask you about that, Trip. What about the president's agenda, and where is the White House on the impeachment trial? Obviously, the president has pretty much stayed hands off publicly, but do we know if the White House is doing anything at all behind the scenes?
We have a split screen in Congress this week. We have a trial in the Senate of Trump, and at the same time, President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package is moving ahead pretty rapidly. I mean, the House is in the process of actually drafting legislation that would put that together. This week, a committee in the House wrote into the bill, one of the bills that would be part of the package, a $15 minimum wage, which is probably one of the most contentious of the issues in the economic stimulus package. One of the important swing votes in the Senate, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, is opposed to that $15 minimum wage. We're not sure whether it can survive the reconciliation budget process, because of the rules. But it's pretty clear, from the meetings that the president has had with all segments of the Democratic Party, including progressives who, some folks thought he would end up warring against, that he has done a very effective job in bringing together all wings of the party, and there is a strong move that this is going to pass through Congress, without any Republican support, which is what they're prepared for.
Is he bringing any Republicans on board as well, or pretty impressive that he can even unite the Democratic Party.
You know, it remains to be seen. These kinds of votes have, you know, thinking back to the last, you know, crisis in which economic stimulus was a factor in the early year, the first year of the Obama administration, and into the first you know, the first 2 years of the Obama administration. Even if Republicans agree with some of this stuff, it becomes ultimately a very partisan stand. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, with Trump's influence on Republican voters in the base. You know, the election is over. The 2020 election is over. It actually officially ended just this week with the decision in an upstate House race. Claudia Tenney, the Republican, you know, was declared the winner finally in that. But, you know, already congressional lawmakers are thinking ahead to 2022. They're positioning themselves for that. This week, the House Republican congressional arm announced that it had 47, you know, Democrats targeted in races they think they can flip. They only need to win, I guess, 5 or 6 seats at this point to take back the majority. So I think we're going to see, you know, I assume we're going to see, you know, some strong polarization on these bills.
Peter, if the Democrats cannot get the votes to convict, what's the point of all of this? And what are the alternatives they have if they don't convict?
Well, that's a good question. In fact, a lot of Democrats are asking that very question. What is the point of doing this if we're just going to end up with an acquittal that Donald Trump will once again tout as vindication, just the way he did a year ago with the first impeachment trial? So there's a lot of second guessing, at least on the part of some Democrats, quietly, as to whether this is really going to accomplish what they want. What the argument would be made by those who are pushing for the impeachment is by presenting these video images to the public, they will cement in the public mind, at least if not in the Senate chamber, the idea of accountability, the idea that this was what the Trump presidency led to, and that will be a stamp for history, even if not a conviction in the final verdict. I also think I think that they're in a way remind Americans of why they were tired of Donald Trump and ready for Joe Biden. That this, you hear some Democrats argue this is good for Biden because it sort of reminds Americans of how different he is and how exhausted many people were with the Trump presidency, and that sort of may reinforce that perception. But you're right, there's a limit to how far Democrats think this is going to be useful. The idea that there could have been a bipartisan censure, Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, Democrat, tried to push for that. It doesn't seem to be getting traction anywhere. Republican senators saying, I might have been open to that before this impeachment, but since we now have to go through this trial, forget it, I'm not likely to go along. And there's a missed opportunity perhaps there to have a bipartisan stamp of repudiation by the Congress, even if it wasn't a conviction, to say that the Congress of the United States agrees by both parties by substantial numbers that the president did something wrong here. That doesn't seem to be the outcome that we're going to see.
And would there be any repercussions at all from censure?
Well, it depends how you frame it. There are different variations. One would just be a non-binding kind of statement of the Congress in effect. So it would be a statement for history, but not with a tangible impact. There are those who are floating the idea of a censure that would include evocation of the clause in the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War that specifically bars people who were involved in insurrection from running for public office. So a censure resolution could have, for instance, a clause saying we invoke that clause to say that Donald Trump is no longer eligible for running for public office in the future. That would be a tangible impact, less likely to get Republican votes.
And that could be passed by a majority.
That could be passed by a majority by both houses of Congress. Now, it would be presumably tested in courts because it's never been invoked in this kind of a circumstance before. But you're right, you could have a majority vote in both houses of Congress pass something like that.
Thanks to Peter Baker and Tripp Gabriel of the New York Times. And coming up next, the former Wall Street executive who wants to be the next mayor of New York. Literally dozens of candidates vying to become the next mayor of New York. The New York Times writes, quote, "The race to become New York City's next mayor is one of the most consequential political contests in a generation, with the recovery of the nation's largest city at stake." One of those candidates is Raymond McGuire, the former vice chairman of financial giant Citigroup. He's got the strong backing of the business community, which has been mostly ignored by Mayor de Blasio. McGuire has raised millions for his campaign, and the Times writes, quote, Mr. McGuire's donor list reads like an index from corporate America, Wall Street, the entertainment industry, and real estate. At least 20 billionaires on the list, including owners of sports teams and oil company chief executives. Will that hurt him politically in a city where progressives and left-leaning Democrats opposed to Amazon's plans for a headquarters in Queens and blocked a planned expansion of Industry City in Brooklyn? Or will it help because finance and real estate are so critical to New York's economy? We're pleased to welcome Ray McGuire to our program. Let me ask you, sir, you talked about being unbought and unbossed, but you're also untested as a politician, as a public figure, as a public office holder. So with all the candidates in the race, and there's so many, why should people put their faith in you to be the next mayor?
Thank you for having me, Sam. To answer the question specifically, if you look at what I have done, and I will distinguish that somewhat from who I am, although who I am informs what I have done and what I will do. I have the experience. I have managed through crises. I have managed budgets, Sam, often bigger than many state budgets. I've built teams and led teams from the depths of the financial crisis to out of that financial crisis. So if what is needed today is somebody who can pull the city together, I take my lived experiences, I take what I've been able to accomplish in 4 decades of being in business, and I take my relationships that I've been able to develop over those years. We need someone who understands how to lead and how to manage and how to bring this city together. I think I'm uniquely positioned to be able to do just that.
You talk about a lot of programs in your plan, and it's a fairly specific plan on your website. You talk about things like city-funded subsidies to cover half the pay for thousands of workers at small businesses. You talk about childcare for all, things like that. How are we going to afford that at the same time when the city's tax revenue, particularly property tax revenue, is really in the toilet?
So we have to look at the entirety of the budget, Sam, which is where my expertise and experience comes into play in full relief, which is clearly what's needed. The plan to which you refer is my economic McGuire comeback plan, which is go big, go small, go forward. And the way that we finance this, and as I've looked at budgets, probably over 50 budgets, is you need to look at the entirety of the budget, which is what I have done. We need to figure out where we can get efficiencies. We need to figure out where, when appropriate, for those people who are the taxpayers, the large taxpayers can pay more. And we also need to make sure that we develop public-private partnerships. We need to come out of this together. And what I know, Sam, is that in order for us to survive, we have to grow. We can neither tax nor cut our way out of this. We need to grow our way out of this, which is going to require what we had in the 70s, business, labor, government, all coming together. And I'm uniquely positioned in my plan, the greatest comeback, the greatest, most inclusive comeback, to pull all the constituencies necessary together in ways that nobody else can, because I've done that.
You said we need tax increases on those who can afford it, yourself included, you pointed out. Which tax increases? And Mayor Bloomberg, when he was mayor, said he wanted more rich people in the city because they could pay more taxes. Do you want more rich people in the city?
Listen, I think we're all going to have to come together. I am pro-growth. I'm pro-growth because when you have growth, business and labor come together. If I look at the construction budget, when you cited the decrease in what's taking place with the taxpayers, with the tax budget, with the tax roll, also take a look at the decline in the construction budget. We need to build in order for labor to be at the table and to participate with us. Remember, no jobs, no city, no jobs, no economy. My plan is specifically geared to making certain that we grow our way out of this. It includes labor at the table with me. And so it's by definition necessary for us to grow. When it comes to taxes, yes, I want people in New York who start at the bottom like I did, who make their way up, who can afford to pay taxes. I also want to make certain that what we give in exchange for those taxes is the premier, preeminent experience of anyone living in any large city anywhere in the world. We got to do this together. And so, yes, I want those people who can pay. I want them in New York. I want this to be the most attractive, inclusive city for all demographics.
Speaking of all demographics, you said that you could easily be George Floyd. You could have been racially profiled. You have been racially profiled. When is the last time that happened?
You know, the last time it happened, Sam, is on the day that we were going to make our launch video. And that was just a few weeks ago, I guess now, maybe a couple months ago. But listen, what I recognize is, you know, pre-COVID, if I walked into any large department store, I was one of three things. I was men's suits, I was where's the restroom, or I was security. I got that. And so being George Floyd and an extension of that, and the George Floyd situation, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a cold-blooded murder is just symptomatic of some of the inequities, gross inequities that exist in this country. And I've written about it and I've talked about it, and that persists. So, you know, I live that.
Over that. We've had a Black president, we've had a Black mayor. How do we get past that?
You know, we need to get past that by getting away from the divisive narrative, for one. For two, we need to make sure that we interact with each other and develop relationships, and that we get away from what is so highly stereotyped with respect to Black men and Black women, but especially Black men. And we need to have examples of those of us who have been successful, who have invested in the community across the spectrum, in business, in government, in entertainment, in athletics, in the faith-based community. All of us need to come together, and those successes need to be highlighted. As much as any one success, all those successes need to be highlighted. We've paid particular attention to one or two, but not the totality of the excellence that has been demonstrated by those in the African-American community. And the more that we develop these relationships and the more those stories are told and celebrated, the more we can eliminate the profiling and the stereotypes and the prejudice that have persisted for far too long. And that's part of what I reflect. That's part of what I demonstrate.
You've opted out of the public finance system. You've taken money from, as we said earlier, people who are billionaires, real estate interests. It seems to me that the whole issue about taking money from real estate interests might be a little bit of a red herring. In the 70s, real estate interests were some of the leaders in bringing the city back during the fiscal crisis, in part self-interest. They couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't move. So as someone who's taking campaign contributions from the private sector, is there anyone you would not take campaign contributions from?
Sam, this is, listen, we are in a situation where New York City is broke, it's broken, and it's divided. My sole motivation here is what's in the best interest of New York. I didn't get termed out. I've not worked in the administration. I'm not looking for a promotion. I'm looking to get support from all New Yorkers. And what's get highlighted are those people who've been really well-to-do. We also need to highlight those contributors who've been less well-to-do, who have contributed, who want something different. I don't owe anybody anything. I'm doing this solely for a city that I love and a city that I care so deeply about, and a city today that needs to have the appropriate leadership. So I am prepared and open to all those who have the same agenda as I have. I'm not a politician. My agenda is solely what's in the best interest of New York City, especially for those people who look like me. So I'll take dollar contributions and 50-cent contributions. I welcome all of those because the agendas are completely aligned.
It's a city that you love, but you didn't vote in 2017 in the mayoral race, and you remember supporting Bill Thompson in 2009. If you love the city so much, where was the political commitment in those times? And did you vote for Mike Bloomberg when he was running?
So I have been a long-standing supporter of the Democratic Party, both from a congressional level, a local level, a senatorial level, and a presidential level. So if you look at my track record of investing in the Democratic Party, in politics, that track record is a long-standing track record, including, as you know, I was the person who introduced now Vice President Kamala Harris to New York. And with respect to my voting, listen, I accept that. Like all New Yorkers, you kind of get distracted. I wish I had, but there's nothing more important. There's nothing more important than voting. So I look at what has taken place in my support of the Democratic Party, which has been unequivocal and longstanding.
The Independent Budget Office says the city won't get back to pre-COVID employment levels till the end of 2024. Your plan, you say, will accelerate that. How's it going to do that?
So my economic plan, my McGuire comeback plan, is go big, go small, go forward. Go small. Let me focus on that because that is 50% of the employee base in New York. And what that identifies is taking.
If you do that quickly, please.
It's a jobs accelerator, which means that we put small businesses back in business immediately. At least 50,000 of those small businesses. Wage subsidies, making sure that we inject capital into those businesses through grants or equity capital, making sure that we have comeback banks in the local neighborhoods and have a local neighborhood initiative. And then it has a lot to do with large infrastructure projects. It would put 500,000 New Yorkers back to work. We can't wait to 2024. My plan is to get New Yorkers back to work immediately.
We'll invite you back to hear more about your mayoral campaign and your mayoral platform before the June primary. Thanks so much for joining us. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I am Sam Roberts.
Thank you, Sam.